Hello class, happy Tuesday. I hope all of you had a great Memorial Day weekend. For homework tonight, you have to complete the Chapter 11, Section 3 key terms. All right, the school year is coming to an end, sadly. I can't believe this is pretty much the last week of May. On Friday, you'll get your final assignments, your projects. Okay, I'll talk more about that on Friday, but just want to give you a heads up. Maybe some of you are looking forward to it, or whatever the case may be. All right, but make sure you get the key terms done. They're not due till Thursday at 3 p.m. Tomorrow's your activities day, so I don't have anything due that day. These will be due, again, Thursday by 3 p.m. If you're missing any other assignments, please make sure you get them to me by the end of the week. I'll try to send some emails out, all right, to remind you. All right, but you are responsible for submitting assignments, all right? Hold yourself accountable, okay? So moving on to where we left off, we talked about Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society on Thursday. We talked about John F. Kennedy's brief presidency. All right, that was very successful. Now we're going to talk about how the civil rights continued. And we're going to talk about a man that was really a leader in the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And you can see, all right, his speech. That was, his "I Have a Dream" speech here at the Washington Mall with the Washington Monument in the background, and hundreds of thousands of people gathered, all right, to listen to him talk. And Martin Luther King Jr., his civil rights movement, all right, begins with a nonviolent strategy. All right, MLK, that's abbreviated for Martin Luther King Jr. Just so for those of you that didn't know that, he preached this idea of civil disobedience. And that's a term you're going to need to know for homework tonight. And civil disobedience is basically the peaceful refusal to obey unjust laws. Okay. And it's basically peaceful protesting. And as you read in the past couple sections, all right, there was a lot of laws that African Americans and white leaders of the civil rights movement felt that were unjust. All right, they were unjust towards segregation. Segregation itself was unjust, and he preached that idea. Martin Luther King Jr. is kind of credited for bringing that idea here in the United States. All right, but this idea of peaceful, nonviolent protesting, civil disobedience, originates with his family and is rooted in Christian teachings. All right, his grandfather was a preacher, his father was a preacher, King was a Baptist minister, and he believed, to kind of echo Jesus' teachings, that they should always meet hate with love. Jesus met hate with love, and he believed that African Americans should do the same. Another person that King studied was Mohandas Gandhi. And for those of you that may not know, Gandhi led a nonviolent resistance to India's independence from Britain, okay, in the early 1900s. And King was kind of inspired by Gandhi's methods. He led a series of nonviolent protests. Like Gandhi, King taught that one should resist injustice, even if it meant going to jail or enduring some sort of physical violence, which is kind of what Gandhi went through as he was protesting for India's independence from Britain. Okay, and King owed much of his thinking to a prominent African-American labor leader, A. Philip Randolph, all right, who was a major African-American leader that helped King start his nonviolent civil rights protest. Okay, so I'll give you a couple seconds to copy this down. I apologize for the noise. I am outside on Memorial Day, a beautiful day out here. Not sure. You guys are probably doing something else besides looking at the iPad, I hope. But it's a beautiful day, and that's where I am. I'm outside, and there's a ton of trucks going by in my neighborhood. So if you hear that in the background, that's what it is. All right, it is not Mr. Brennan walking upstairs. All right, moving on. So to build on the momentum of the Montgomery bus boycott, King joined with other African American church leaders to create the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC. And this was created in 1957. And it was founded by King and other African American church leaders. And the primary goal of this conference was for full equality for African Americans. And they wanted to use nonviolence in order to achieve that. Okay, and this Southern Christian Leadership Conference will become the foundation for many civil rights protests. All right, and all of these leaders, including King, declared their commitment to nonviolent civil disobedience. So this helped shift the base of the civil rights movement. Most early civil rights activity had been dominated by Northerners. Now African American churches in the South are going to take the lead in organizing resistance to injustice. And under King's leadership, the SCLC will become the forefront of many civil rights protests throughout the 1960s. And the first protest we're going to talk about, is in 1963. There's a protest in Birmingham, Alabama, in which the Southern Christian Leadership Conference launched massive demonstrations to protest discrimination in Birmingham, Alabama. And thousands of African Americans, including many children, marched peacefully through Birmingham. Police, during this march, used dogs, fire hoses, and electric cattle prods against these marchers, which horrified Americans as they watched right on their television the violence unfold as these African Americans were just peacefully walking through Birmingham, Alabama. All right, and finally, under the intense pressure from business interests in the city, Birmingham authorities agreed to desegregate public facilities. Okay, so they were marching to desegregate public facilities, and also for clerks and salespersons to hire African Americans within certain shops. All right, so know that this was protest against discrimination. All right, and the police used a lot of violent methods, as I said, electric cattle prods, fire hoses, dogs, against these protesters. The second major protest that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference organized was a march on Washington. All right, and the March on Washington took place after events in Birmingham. President Kennedy sent Congress the strongest civil rights bill in nation's history. And to focus attention on the bill, the civil rights leaders proposed a march on the nation's capital. All right, so JFK's bill is really going to help influence this March on Washington. And it took place on August 28th, 1963. Civil rights leaders gather in Washington, and around 250,000 people, peacefully assembled citizens, are going to march on Washington. Okay, and many people, including Christian and Jewish religious leaders, gave speeches that day, but none moved the crowd as Martin Luther King did. His voice rang as he proclaimed, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will be not judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character." So his very famous "I Have a Dream" speech is during this march on Washington, and it pretty much ended at the Washington Mall, which is at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial. And then you have that big pool there, and in the background was the Washington Monument. All right. And this was one of the largest peaceful demonstrations in American history. Like I said, 250,000 people, 250,000 people marched on the nation's capital, August 28, 1963. And there's video footage and pictures of this historical moment. And if you missed anything in these past two slides, you can always go back and watch it. All right, this is the last slide for today. We'll talk more about civil rights legislation on Thursday when we conference. All right, so make sure you get the key terms done. And if you have any questions on any of these slides, I'd be happy to answer them on Thursday. Thank you, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Enjoy your day. Bye.